can watch the extended, ad-free cut of this video right now on Nebula, today's sponsor.
Hey, are you headed to the studio? I actually have some auditions lined up. One is today. I do not feel optimistic about it, but...
Hey, Emma. Is Patrick moonwalking through the office?
He's doing it as we speak.
Do you have any idea what this episode's supposed to be about? Cowboy shit.
I think I can guess.
Hello and welcome back to the show. So ever since I got back to civilization, it feels like I've spent most of my time trying to tie up loose ends, trying to get out of debt, and... Hey Emma, how are we doing on the whole debt thing right now?
I'm happy to report that even with the massive Funko budget for the Vetoes, we are officially no further in the red than we were before.
Okay, could be worse. But especially, I've been trying to catch up on all of the movies I missed while I was stuck on that island. And there is one in particular that I have not been able to get out of my head. I'm obsessed with it. And that movie is Tenet. Remember Tenet? Christopher Nolan's bombastic sci-fi spy movie from 2020? The one that was like, what if James Bond, but sometimes things go backwards? It was released during the height of the pandemic, way before there were any vaccines, when most movie theaters in the US were closed. And for some insane reason, Tenet was positioned as the thing that would unite movie fans around the world and bring us all back to the theaters, even though at the time it wasn't safe. It was a big, exciting summer blockbuster for everyone. After all, this was the new film by Chris Nolan, the guy who gave us The Dark Knight, Inception, and Interstellar, maybe the most popular filmmaker of the century. In retrospect, this idea of Tenet saving the movie theater business is kind of hilarious. Even if it had been released during a normal time, this was never going to be a crowd-pleasing sensation like Inception was. Nolan is sometimes accused of being cold and emotionless, making self-serious movies that look like concrete. But one thing that has always been true is that he's a populist. He makes crowd-pleasing movies full of exciting spectacle that, even when complicated, can be understood by a mass audience. And Tenet is by far his most obtuse, confounding film. I would actually say this is one of the strangest would-be blockbusters of the century. But I also don't think that is a bad thing. See, I think Tenet is Christopher Nolan doing a heat check. What is a heat check? Well, this might sound crazy coming from me, but it's actually an expression that comes from basketball. So to explain it in more detail, I brought in someone who knows way more about basketball than me, my upstairs neighbor, actor Scott Thomas. Scott, over to you.
Heat check. Oh my God, heat checks are my favorite thing in the world. Okay, let's say you're at a basketball game and you're watching Steph Curry, my close personal friend, and he's gone 4 for 4, right? He's gonna try to go 5 for 5, but he's gotta make a trickier shot because that's the heat check. Steph Curry needs to see just how hot he is. When you see Steph Curry pull up from the logo, sink that sweet 3, heat check. Steph Curry hosting Wipeout with no acting experience whatsoever, heat check. And my man Steph is hot.
Thank you, Scott. So, how does this concept of the heat check apply to Tenet? Well, for the previous 15 years or so, Nolan was on fire. It seemed like he couldn't miss. Not only did his Batman movies make billions of dollars, but he also managed to do something that's nearly impossible these days. He made an original blockbuster with a pretty crazy premise, and it was a huge commercial hit that also got a Best Picture Oscar nomination. And so then, he made a bigger, crazier original movie, and it was another huge hit. And then he made a sort of experimental study of time disguised as a war movie, and it made $500 million and got another Best Picture nomination. So then, I assume, Nolan decided to really challenge himself. He had to see how hot his hot streak really was. Could he make a huge globe-trotting action blockbuster, but also strip out all of the stuff that every screenwriting guru would tell you has to be in there to be successful? In other words, Nolan was about to attempt some serious... Emma?
Cowboy shit?
That's right. Cowboy shit.
This is cowboy shit.
You know how Inception spends the first half of the movie patiently explaining all of the rules and making sure everyone knows exactly how this world works? And you know how Inception has a really clear emotional goal for the main character to get home and reunite with his kids? Yeah, Tenet doesn't do any of that. The plot of the movie, which involves international arms dealing, art forgery, and quantum physics with characters moving in different directions through time, often within the same scene, is thrown at you incredibly fast. So while you're trying to work out the mechanics of it all, the movie is already on to the next scene. Half of the time, the dialogue is buried under incredibly loud sound effects and music, and is basically unintelligible. There is no emotional goal for the hero. There's no save the cat moment to endear us to him. No refusal of the call to add internal conflict. He just does what he does without ever really doubting the mission. There is no love story. The hero does not have a final showdown with the villain. The audience never learns anything about the hero. He has no backstory, or motivation, or emotional arc, and oh yeah, he doesn't even have a name.
I'm the protagonist.
This is a movie that, understandably, drove a lot of people nuts. I totally understand looking at this and going, this is a bunch of unintelligible nonsense. What the fuck's going on? And yet, I love it. I really do. And I should be clear that none of these aspects of the movie are accidental. It's not like Nolan overslept on the first day of production and just forgot to give the main character a name. And I think there is a very simple key to enjoying Tenet. Just one line of dialogue that unlocks it all. It happens 15 minutes into the movie, when the protagonist, played by John David Washington, meets with Barbara, played by Gossip Girl's Clemence Posey, who explains some of what's going on, how there is a war in the future where people are inverting the entropy of things and sending them back in time. And then she says to him 7 magic words.
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
Don't try to understand it, feel it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the key to being a Tenet enjoyer. Stop trying to impose the rules of other movies on it. Stop trying to understand every detail of the plot. Just vibe with it. So when I say just vibe with it, what does that actually mean? Well, basically, it means that if you can't follow everything that's happening in the plot, if you get a little lost, if you don't understand everything the characters are talking about, or how there are 2 Robert Pattinsons running through the climactic sequence and which direction in time each one is going, just don't worry about it. Because the truth is, there are far more important things here than the plot. Tenet is an espionage action movie, and this kind of movie is always driven by objectives. We always understand that the protagonist needs to get to a place to get a thing that is important to him. The specifics of that thing are less important. Alfred Hitchcock once told Francois Truffaut that the best MacGuffins are, quote, the emptiest, the most non-existent, and the most absurd. And the MacGuffin in Tenet, a bunch of connected metal objects that are a code for an algorithm that will allow bad people in the future to invert the entropy of the world and thus kill us all, is as empty, non-existent, and absurd as they come. And this is also why I don't think that infamous incomprehensible dialogue is as big a deal as people make it out to be. Let's look at one scene in the movie, a scene where the protagonist goes sailing on these big fancy catamarans with Sator, the villain, and his estranged wife, Kat. Going into this scene, we know that Sator has contact with people in the future who are sending those objects back in time that might destroy the world. So the protagonist is trying to make contact with him to learn more. So then we have this scene with just incredible imagery, these massive steel boats slicing through the water, while Ludwig Göransson's score is going absolutely wild with these hypnotic looping electric guitars. Sator and the protagonist have a bunch of dialogue here, shouting over the roar of the water, saying exposition about stolen plutonium and making some kind of deal, but you can barely hear it. And that doesn't matter. So here, let's strip out the dialogue track and look at the scene without it. So watching this, you can still understand the important things in this scene. You get that the protagonist, who is unfamiliar with this world, is trying to fit in and keep up with their sailing. Kat hates Sator and tries to drown him, but the protagonist needs to keep him alive as part of the larger plan, so he saves his life. Thus, Sator is indebted to him, and in the next scene, they're able to make a deal. The number of the piece of stolen plutonium they're discussing doesn't really matter. It's the spectacle and the vibes that are important. You understand the emotion and the story, even if the minor details don't come through. And this scene is kind of the perfect example of the fun of Tenet. It's this overwhelming sensory experience, where the coolest music ever is constantly playing as you're swept along by a narrative that is moving forward, sometimes in reverse, with incredible momentum, full of astonishing imagery you've never seen before in a world of incredibly dense detail. And if you miss a little bit of that detail, whatever, man. Don't worry about it. Just feel it. And now, before some weirdos on the internet take this out of context and say, Patrick Willems said dialogue doesn't matter, but a couple years ago in a video, he praised the dialogue in some other movie, therefore he's a hypocrite. Let me be clear, all I am saying here is that plot and exposition are not the single most important elements of a film. So chill out. Tenet is a major example of what I want to anoint as a new category of movies. Kind of like other Patrick did a couple years ago with gonzo blockbusters. The most descriptive term would technically be guys in cool suits on missions movies, but that's a bit of a mouthful and doesn't quite capture it. So instead, we're going to call them vibes movies. I realize that there are a lot of movies you could call vibes movies. They're usually art films that are light on plot and heavy on atmosphere. So like the works of Terrence Malick or Krzysztof Kieślowski, those are movies that are obviously all about vibes. They're full of characters not speaking, but looking and walking and twirling and feeling a lot of feelings through gorgeously composed, moody imagery. Those films are closer to what you might call, and I'm so sorry to use this term, tone poems. But we're not talking about those here. See, what separates the vibes movies in this category is that they generally come with the trappings of conventional action or spy movies. In these movies, the characters have goals and missions. These are movies where you can rarely recount exactly what the plot was, and in the moment, you sometimes aren't sure exactly what's happening, but you're swept along by the urgency with which the characters are moving through glamorous locations, often ending up in chase scenes and shootouts. There's something oddly compelling about the dialogue that is almost entirely procedural minutia and inside baseball talk from people in a world that we're unfamiliar with. Other than Tenet, the major entry in the vibes movie canon is Miami Vice, Michael Mann's 2006 reimagining of the 80s TV series. It stars Colin Farrell and Jamie Foxx as Crockett and Tubbs, undercover cops for Miami PD's Vice Squad who end up deep in a world of drug smuggling, cartels, and mojitos.
I'm a fiend for mojitos.
Mann has always made stylish movies about serious, stoic professionals involved in a world of crime, but Miami Vice is a step deeper into that. While Heat, his 1995 masterpiece, obsessively chronicled all of the procedural details involved in the jobs of LAPD Lieutenant Vincent Hanna and Master Thief Neil McCauley, it also devoted lots of time to their personal lives. They had relationships with normal women from the regular world. Hanna picked up his stepdaughter from school. They went to coffee shops.
Heat. Great film.
Yes, Val Kilmer is in Heat, one of the best films. But anyway, Miami Vice has none of that. It might as well take place in another dimension. No aspect of any character's lives feel normal to us. They never seem to go home. They never seem to speak dialogue that sounds like anything a human being has ever said.
Something's gotta go somewhere, somewhen. Not too distant in the future.
Every phone call is either made on a rooftop or in a Ferrari driving 90 miles per hour. Mann has absolutely no interest in giving the audience the slightest bit of recognizable reality to cling to. But the thing is, if you don't really follow what people are saying or what the plot is, that's okay. It's actually part of the fun. The point of it is the experience. So here's what Spring Breakers director Harmony Korine said about Miami Vice. The reason I love Mann's movies, and that movie in particular, is I could feel the place. When I watch that film, I don't even pay attention to what they're saying or the storyline. I love the colors, I love the texture. And that is straight from the mouth of the tone poem trash vibe king himself. I mean, he made this movie, so he should know. To varying extents, some of the Mission Impossible movies also qualify as vibes movies, particularly the first installment, which for decades has been criticized for being almost impossible to understand, which I don't think it is, as well as the latest installment, Fallout, the twistiest, moodiest film in the series. They don't rank quite as highly on the vibe scale as Tenet or Miami Vice, since their emphasis on character, emotion, and action makes them less impenetrable, but they still qualify. And then there is James Bond, the series that built the foundation for vibes movies. Unless you're someone in your 60s, and looking at my audience analytics, not many of you are, James Bond movies have been around your whole life, like a weird uncle who shows up once every few years to tell you about his latest tropical vacation. We're all familiar with them and it's easy to take them for granted, but there is some stuff about them that is kind of unusual that I want to acknowledge. Up until the Daniel Craig reboot, the movies contained basically no information about James Bond's past life or history. Hey, get out of here, Lazenby. You're muddying my point. Anyway, James Bond has no origin story. We briefly see his flat in the very first movie, and then in the next 20 movies, we only see it one other time. There are love interests in every movie, but none of them ever return. Before the 2006 reboot, he only appears to have one serious romantic partner. Okay, Lazenby, you can come back for a sec. Who he marries, and then immediately after the wedding, she's murdered. That marriage is only ever briefly referenced in 2 other movies. And so, we have a movie series following one protagonist across 20 movies where we learn nothing about his life, he has no serious interpersonal relationships, he never grows or changes or has any traditional kind of emotional arc. In every film, his motivation is simply doing his job and following orders. And yet, we don't question it. That's just how these movies work. No one has ever gone to see a Bond movie to experience the character's dramatic emotional journey. Nolan's movies have always been inspired by the Bond films in a lot of ways, from the general style and all the gadgetry to a couple specific scenes, like Batman jumping off a building in The Dark Knight, which resembles the opening of GoldenEye, to the Ice Fortress climax in Inception, which looks a lot like On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But it's not just his action movies. In his first feature, the low-budget crime indie Following, he even makes a femme fatale look suspicious by having her open her eyes and look off screen while kissing the main character, an image borrowed from Goldfinger. And Tenet is, in many ways, Nolan directly confronting his love of Bond movies and making his own version. When asked about it, he said, "So the influence of Bond on this is colossal, but I didn't watch any. In fact, I probably went the longest period of my life not watching a Bond film ever, because it's not the real Bond film, it's your memory of it that's important and what it could be." A major aspect of vibes movies is that they are always about a certain kind of character. The protagonists in these movies are constantly in motion. They're always traveling to wherever the mission takes them. They usually have no permanent homes that we ever see. The closest thing to a home the protagonist in Tenet has is a lighthouse where he seems to spend a couple days doing pull-ups. When these characters attempt to have romantic relationships, they are almost always doomed. In Miami Vice, Tubbs is dating a coworker, and she ends up getting captured and almost dies. Crockett has an affair with a woman on the other side who doesn't know he's a cop, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't work out in the end.
Time is luck.
Luck run out.
Also unsurprising is that Tenet has no romance at all. That's never really been Nolan's thing. But the real meaningful relationship in the movie, as is the case with most vibes movies, is between the partners. Here, the protagonist and Neil, also known as Protagoneil. The big fun twist of the final scene in Tenet is that Neil has known the protagonist for years, but in the future. They're best friends but living in opposing timelines, one saying hello for the first time as the other says goodbye for the last time. The most stable relationship in Miami Vice is between Crockett and Tubbs. They never discuss feelings or open up to each other because, come on, these are big tough men who are way too cool and stoic for bullshit like that, but there is an unspoken closeness and trust that you can always feel. The vibes are strong. This loneliness is central to the Mission Impossible series, which begins with Ethan Hunt losing everyone close to him. It's why it feels wrong when Mission Impossible 3 gives him a normal life in the suburbs married to a regular person. Like, come on guys, that's not what these movies are about. And so the series immediately course corrects in the next movie. Now the marriage is over because it put his wife's life in danger, and Ethan remains alone, checking in on her from afar. And from here, we're usually introduced to Ethan alone in a prison cell or sleeping alone in a cold safe house. An ongoing question through the series is, can a person with this life be happy and get close to anyone? He keeps pushing people away, even his team members who keep reminding him that they are his friends.
I am your friend.
The one real potential partner in the series is Ilsa Faust, someone who comes from the same world as Ethan and knows this life. So, will things work out for them in the next movie? I guess we'll find out in a few months. By the way, if anyone from Paramount Pictures happens to be watching right now, I just want you to know that Mission Impossible is my favorite movie series. I have made several videos about it. Dead Reckoning Part 1 is far and away my most anticipated movie of the year, and I would really, really love to attend the world premiere. So if you can spare a ticket or two, I will gladly pay for my own travel to wherever in the world it's taking place. I just think it would be really, really cool and fun, and probably the highlight of my year. Anyway, hashtag Mission Impossible, and let's get back to the episode. Brooding, lonely men, obsessed with their work above all other aspects of their lives. That's not too dissimilar from me. I guess you could say I'm something of a vibes movie protagonist myself.
Would we say that?
Just think about it. My friend Jake, he died. Chloe turned evil. Matt became really successful and I haven't seen him in a while. That's heavy stuff.
What about other Chloe? And Dave? And me?
I mean, I guess you guys are fine. For now. Hey, we should get some cocktails up in here. Like Sonny Crockett, I'm a fiend for mojitos.
And I'm a silly goose for strawberry daiquiris.
Dave?
I'm a ravenous hellhound for Moscow mules.
And I'm a punctual adult for a cool glass of milk.
He's new here, so
as the person making up this whole category, that means that I also get to make up the qualifications a movie needs to be considered a vibes movie. And I have concluded that it comes down to a combination of 4 main elements. Number 1 is glamour. These movies have to take place in spectacular locations, usually in the world of the ultra-rich. They usually need to feature at least 2 countries. This is one thing that separates vibes movies from most other modern blockbusters. Instead of all being filmed in front of green screens, they shoot on location in real places around the world. Aesthetics are key. The fashion, the vehicles, they need to be aspirational. Vibes movies are detached from the real world. There can be nothing mundane. This is why they mostly seem to take place in nightclubs, or operas, or on yachts, skyscrapers, boats, and luxury cars. Element number 2 is loneliness. Like I described earlier, we rarely, if ever, see the characters' homes. They have no normal lives or families to return to. Their work consumes their existence. There is a lack of meaningful relationships outside of their work partner, and romance is almost always doomed. Number 3 is spectacle. Look, these are usually action movies, so a degree of spectacle is there by design. This is kind of an extension of glamour in that they need to show us incredible sights. Sometimes that's a car chase with some cars crashing backwards, sometimes it's Tom Cruise clinging to the side of an airplane taking off, and sometimes it's just an awesome shot of a go-fast boat going vroom vroom across the ocean. And number 4 is momentum. The characters always need to be on the move, constantly traveling, which is how we get to see all these cool, glamorous locations. In Tenet, one dialogue scene between 2 characters will take place in 4 different locations, so even when they stop to talk, they're still on the move. The stories are goal-oriented. The characters need to get to a place, to get a meeting, to get information, to get a MacGuffin, to stop something terrible, so there's always a ticking clock. And if we want to bring numbers and math into this, because as we've established in previous episodes, it's a terrific way to analyze art, we can grade each movie on a 5-point scale for each of these categories to see how they score and where they fit in the vibes movie canon. This way, some other movies that might be lacking in one category can still potentially qualify. Nicholas Winding Refn's drive might make it, even if it's lacking in glamour and momentum. Or some of Jean-Pierre Melville's movies, like Le Cercle Rouge or Le Samurai. But I am sorry to say that despite its title, the 1988 Jeff Goldblum Cyndi Lauper comedy Vibes doesn't make the cut. Okay, now we keep talking about mood and atmosphere and spectacle and, vibes. But this brings us to a larger, arguably more important question. How much does plot actually matter? And we are not even going to get into plot holes here because it is 2023 and no one should still be talking about that shit. We are living in an age of media discourse where when you look at YouTube and Reddit and articles and posts across the internet, the main thing that most people seem to be concerned with is plot. And to an extent, I get it, because especially in the last 15 years or so, media has trained us to focus on plot, to study the lore of franchises, to know what each Infinity Stone is and what it does and where it's located at any given time. If you spend any time online, you'll see people constantly complaining about so-called filler episodes of television, flashback episodes on The Last of Us, Breaking Bad's Fly, any Mandalorian episode that doesn't directly tie into existing Star Wars mythology. Over the past year or so, there's been this new dumb as hell opinion gaining popularity online that there shouldn't be sex scenes in movies because they don't advance the plot. So apparently, things like characterization, or mood, feeling, and meaning are all unimportant. If it's not moving the linear sequence of events forward, it must not matter. But let's clarify what we actually mean when we talk about plot. Plot is not the same as story. Plot is simply information. It is the series of events that happen to the characters. The story is something else. It's what the characters want, how they react to the plot, how they change. The plot is literally just the Wikipedia summary. So for example, let's look at the Wikipedia page for Miami Vice and scroll down a bit to the plot. There's one sentence there that says, quote, "They then coerce their Miami informant contact Nicholas into setting up a meet and greet with the cartel." Okay, cool. That's the plot. They have a meeting with a guy to set up another meeting. But now let's look at the actual movie, and here's what happens. In the middle of this tense negotiation with Miami informant contact Nicholas in his concrete and glass house right on the ocean, Crockett turns away and gazes out across the water. As the conversation fades away, he seems to be imagining an escape, a life of peace away from this violent world he lives in, before he's pulled back into reality. Now this is the stuff that doesn't make it into the plot summary. And moments like this are what these movies are really about. These vibes movies, which arrive with the presentation of traditional action movies, end up being perfect illustrations of why plot doesn't really matter. This goes all the way back to pulp detective novels and up through Bond movies, Mission Impossible movies, Miami Vice, and Tenet. I love these things, and I cannot remember the exact details of the plots of any of them, because that's not the part that's important. Here is Raymond Chandler's classic novel, The Big Sleep, which was adapted into a classic film by Howard Hawks starring Humphrey Bogart. The plot is so famously convoluted that on the set of the movie, Hawks called Chandler to ask him who exactly killed this one minor character, and Chandler didn't have an answer. And I have read this book and watched that movie, and I can tell you, it doesn't really matter. The story is moving forward quickly and it makes emotional sense. You know what the characters want, it's exciting, and so you don't even really have time to worry if you didn't catch every single little detail. Christopher McQuarrie, a very smart guy who won a screenwriting Oscar before he turned 30 and is currently writing and directing the next two Mission Impossible movies, explained it here on Twitter better than I could on literally the same day that I wrote this essay. Build character through action. Screw the plot. Plot is merely why things happen. Character is why I give a shit that it's happening. Bond's structure, generally speaking, is a study in the irrelevance of plot. I cannot recall a single Bond plot in any detail, but I know where Bond is going and why at all times. When it's working, I'm never confused as to his immediate objective. This, right here, is why these movies work. We might be unclear about the exact details of the plot, what secret information is in these documents and how it got stolen from a guy who got murdered, but because these movies always lay out clear objectives for the characters, all we really need to know is what they are trying to do at that specific moment, and these objectives are what take us to these amazing experiences. In a recent piece, Byron Lafayette wrote, "The best way to describe Miami Vice is not as a movie or story, but as an experience. The story and characters play a backseat to the mood, music, set pieces, environment, and ambiance of what is playing out on the screen. The viewer is not asked to understand what is going on. In fact, the script does not even bother to explain. Miami Vice asks you to vibe along with it, to immerse yourself in the colors, music, and digital landscapes it inhabits." See, the real pleasures of these movies don't come from why things are happening, it comes from how they happen. Early on in Tenet, for the protagonist to have a meeting with an arms dealer, he has to go to Mumbai and then bungee jump up the side of a high-rise building. Later on, the movie establishes that Sator bought a piece of Goya artwork that was forged by a friend of his wife's that the protagonist needs to steal for some reason, but that doesn't really matter. What does matter is that to steal it, he needs to crash a plane into an airport to break in while he and Neil wear awesome suits, and then he gets attacked by a man moving in reverse who we later learn is him from the future, traveling back through the events of the movie, thus creating a visual metaphor for the whole premise here of there being a war between the future and the present, and I think that's pretty cool. Early in Mission Impossible Fallout, Ethan Hunt has to get to a secret meeting in a nightclub in Paris within a tight deadline. So the only way to get there in time is by leaping out of an airplane during a lightning storm and parachuting into the nightclub. The information they need to get, in other words, the plot, is just an excuse to create an objective and a ticking clock and create these spectacular scenes. In Miami Vice, after a meeting in which the undercover cops set up terms of a drug smuggling operation with the leaders of a cartel, Crockett asks one of them out for a drink. When he says he's a fiend for mojitos, she says, "I know a place," leading to a sequence where they drive off in a go-fast boat across the ocean to Cuba. It's 2 minutes of them in a boat while cool music plays. This is what we mean when we say vibes movies. And I also love the implication that she knew a specific place to go for any drink he might have said.
Patrick, how long do I have to do this?
Just a little bit longer. If we've learned anything from these movies, it's that important revelations always come while characters are looking off at the ocean.
It feels like cheating. Now, if I was by the actual ocean, maybe on the windy white cliffs of Dover.
Emma, I keep telling you, we can't afford to send you to England.
But it's where the film Locke was born. This channel never goes anywhere cool.
The roots of vibes movies are partly in Fritz Lang's early silent films, like Spies or Dr. Mabuse the Gambler, but they're mostly in post-World War II hard-boiled detective novels by writers like the aforementioned Raymond Chandler or my personal fave, Ross MacDonald. These were tales about lonely detectives, hard men who constantly encounter only death, misery, and betrayal on every job. These were the main inspirations for the original James Bond novels by Ian Fleming, which were more grounded and less winking than the movies we're familiar with. When the Bond novels became films, they left behind some of the darker elements, dropping the moments where Bond felt guilt over all the murders he was committing, and instead choosing to emphasize the glamour of this world and lifestyle. He was a cool guy who only wore the coolest clothes and drove the coolest cars. His missions always took him to expensive, luxurious, exotic places, often the domain of the ultra-rich, a world most of the audience will never see or come close to affording. And these distinctly cinematic aspects, the aesthetics, the spectacular sets designed by Ken Adams, the on-location shooting in various spots around the world, are much of the series' appeal. The massive popularity of the Bond series inspired countless espionage movies and TV shows, including Mission Impossible, which would later be rebooted as the Tom Cruise starring blockbuster movie series. And even though I almost never hear this brought up, I also think that Bond was a pretty big influence on the 1984 TV series Miami Vice, which would of course later be rebooted as the Michael Mann movie that we're discussing in this video. Miami Vice emphasized style, atmosphere, and vibes in a way American TV, especially cop shows, never had before. This was crime noir, but with the glamour, the cool clothing, and cars and music of James Bond movies. You can see this in what's probably the show's most iconic scene, right from the pilot episode. It's Crockett and Tubbs driving at night on their way to a showdown with a criminal, while In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins plays. The scene is mostly silent, just 2 minutes of shots of their faces, the wheels, and lights reflecting across the hood of Crockett's Ferrari. American TV drama until then always prioritized packing as much plot as possible into each episode, and so at the time, these kinds of visuals and music were revolutionary. This right here, it's pure vibes. 2 decades before he made the movie, Michael Mann was actually a producer on the original Miami Vice TV show, around the time that he was directing neo-noir crime movies like Thief and Manhunter. Mann is largely credited with setting the style and aesthetics of the show. In other words, the vibes. Christopher Nolan is on the record as being very influenced by Michael Mann. Like, Heat is pretty clearly the biggest single influence on The Dark Knight. And so it makes sense that Tenet grew out of this convergence of influences. James Bond and Michael Mann. Everything is connected. All of these things vibing big ol' vibes together across decades of cinema.
This is cowboy shit.
In his piece, The Joys of Not Understanding Tenet, Elroy Rosenberg writes, "We don't have to get everything to find something meaningful in it. Sometimes the most ambiguous, which is to say inexplicit experiences, are the ones which are the most explicitly instructive. Tenet is not an intentionally didactic movie, but it certainly does teach us just that, the necessity to sometimes let go, to leave behind our compulsion to rationalize, and to experience art on an ulterior wavelength. I think part of the reason that I find myself so drawn to these vibes movies lately is because of how increasingly interchangeable and homogenous other movies, especially blockbuster tentpoles, feel. We see so many movies that look and feel the same, shot on green screens with standard, functional coverage, that when something like Tenet comes along, it feels kind of like putting on an oxygen mask, allowing us to breathe inverted air while we're moving backwards through time. So what I'm trying to say is, it's a breath of fresh air. Even if the Mission Impossible series is about to reach its 7th and 8th installments, it's less concerned with lore and continuity and setting up spin-offs than any other franchise this century. Their priority, and this goes for all the Vibes movies, is the experience, the journey, showing us amazing new things. And as much as all of the mission discussion is about the various stunts, which are of course astonishing, much of the draw for me has always been the atmosphere and style and its increasingly haunted protagonist. It's ironic that James Bond, the root of most of these movies, ended up getting mired in its newfound need to build a continuity and focus on the plot. There's a lot of talk about how all audiences seem to want and studios seem to want to make are big, shiny, CGI-filled blockbusters based on properties made for children, and that this comes from a desire to escape the miseries of our current world. And while I get that, I think these Vibes movies, melancholy as they may sometimes be, are a purer kind of escapism. These are movies that you cannot half-watch while looking at your phone. They are focused on full immersion into strange worlds that exist within our own. They hold back certain context and information, so you're always trying to keep up. The dialogue isn't what anyone would ever call realistic, but why would we want it to be? It's a mixture of technical jargon.
All right, the secured satellite comms, longs and lats for the transshipment points, that's all cool, but I need a vector, not a location.
A weird sort of poetry.
Fate whispers to the warrior.
And classic noir movie talk.
How would you like to die?
Old.
You chose the wrong profession.
Tenet and Miami Vice frustrated viewers by being not what was expected of normal movies, but as time goes on, that idiosyncratic nature, the weird choices, the denseness of their visions, is what makes me keep returning to them. They're made by skilled filmmakers who trust the visuals and music, the verisimilitude of the world, and immersion into it to carry the viewer forward. And I, for one, love being swallowed up and losing myself in these weird, beautiful worlds. Don't try to understand it, feel it, is a fun idea. But I think this is what feeling it actually means. It does, in fact, mean understanding it. Not intellectually, but instinctively, on a gut level. It means understanding the movie's vibes. Good. Look, folks, I'll be honest with you. There is way more that I have to say about Tenet specifically. My co-writer, Siddhant, is the biggest Tenet expert, or tankspert, I know, and he wrote this whole huge extra section on the joys of understanding Tenet over multiple viewings. And you can see that part in the extended version of this video over on Nebula. Nebula is something near and dear to my heart. It's the streaming service that I helped build that now has way over 600,000 paying subscribers. Nebula has all of my videos, along with the videos of over 150 of the best creators online, with no ads, plus tons of exclusive stuff that you will not see anywhere else. This season of our show, we are making extended versions of every episode that you can only see on Nebula. So our Best of 2022 episode has a whole big section on my favorite TV shows and comics of last year that you can only see on Nebula. The Looney Tunes episode has a whole section on Space Jam 2 that you can only see on Nebula. I don't know, maybe I should start calling these the director's cuts, since it sounds cooler. Would you sign up and watch them then? And if you're new here, Nebula is the only place where you can watch Night of the Coconut, the feature film that I made that will give you context for all of the narrative stuff happening here that might be confusing you. Also, the movie has some banging music and is a musical, and vinyl copies of the soundtrack are available now in our merch store. And if you are a fan of Jetlag the Game, like I am, like I genuinely think it's one of the best shows on right now in any medium, Nebula has every episode a week before it goes on YouTube. Right now, you can get an annual subscription, or monthly, whatever works for you. Just click the link in the description and sign up. And if you sign up with my link, it benefits me, and part of the profits go to me to help me make this show better, and hopefully, finally, be able to afford a proper desk. I just want a desk. Is that so much to ask? Man, I love these movies, and I gotta say, it feels pretty cool to be able to count myself among the ranks of their awesome protagonists.
Except in a few very key areas.
What do you mean?
Well, beside working a lot, you don't stop crime, you don't save the world, you don't get into life or death escapades, you make YouTube videos.
But I'm a fiend for mojitos. Like Sonny Crockett.
Patrick, you promised you weren't going to do that anymore.
But according to Tenet rules, if I want to drink the mojito, I have to have already spit it onto the floor.
Maybe next time, no more alcohol while filming.
Chloe? Oh, hey, there you are. I was gonna order some food. Do you want anything?
Patrick, hi. It's the time of day I look out at the Hudson and contemplate life. You're not walking backwards.
What? Oh yeah, I realize that I can't really pull off that cowboy shit. All these vibes movies and their brooding, lonely protagonists. It's like they exist in a world where the very fabric of space-time seems stained with a neon blue melancholy. Adrift in the universe, with no anchor. Yeah, that's just not really me. But it does sound exactly like you. Damn, yeah, now that I think of it, it seems so obvious. By the way, how'd the auditions go today?
I don't want to talk about it.
I get it. Just like a proper vibes movie protagonist, keeping everything close to the chest. Never letting your emotions spill past that stoic, hardened veneer you present.
Hold on, shut up, Patrick. I just had an idea. Something about looking out at that water made it all click. I'm going to write my own musical. No more being beholden to these fickle producers and casting directors. No, I'm gonna shake off these brooding, fatalistic vibes, and I'm gonna do something for me. And this time, I'm not gonna overthink it. I'm just
gonna feel it. Hell yeah, Chloe. Anyway, I was thinking Thai food?
You know, I am a goofy goober for those drunken noodles.
Vibes are cool, but you know what's better? Thai food and a nice, quiet evening. Who needs those crazy crime capers anyway?
Oh, hello, and welcome to the part at the end of the episode where I just talk to you unscripted about behind-the-scenes stuff that I think you should know about. So the most important thing with this episode, you've already seen it, so you're aware of this. This obviously had the debut of our brand new title sequence that Madeline Tolius has been working on for a while. I'm so excited about how it turned out. She did incredible work. She also made our title sequence from back in 2021, if you remember that one. Anyway, it's so good. I love it. I just want that on the record right here. And of course, we had our banger of a new theme song by Brian. And what else? In case you're not aware, you're probably aware, we have a second channel, Patrick H. Willems Presents, where we mostly do Q&A videos. We have this series that's been running all season called Patrick Replies, where I respond to questions and comments about each of the regular episodes. And so if you have questions about this episode, about Tenet and Miami Vice and Vibes and all that, the best way to submit them so that they will get answered is through our Discord server, which is available exclusively to members of the Patreon. And so join the Patreon, and you can join the Discord server where we just, we talk about movies. It's fun. You can submit questions there. And speaking of the Patreon, I have to mention this every time. We have a set of goals on there for things that will happen, videos I'll make when we hit certain benchmarks. And our next goal that I would really like to hit, that I think everyone would like us to hit, is that at 1,700 patrons, I will guarantee and promise that I will commission a Muppet Patrick for the video about Muppet Cinema coming later this year. So that's how you can make that happen. And almost out of time here. Also, I feel like we should do new merch soon. Tell me what merch you'd like to see. I don't know. What do you want? Well, let me know. Okay, I gotta go. See you next time.